I am delighted to introduce my dear friend Carmen Bess for a conversation on education, mentorship, advocacy, and the role they play in social justice. This is the Education Committee's long program, and I want to acknowledge our wonderful Education Committee and the teamwork we engage in to advance our goals and priorities on behalf of Rotary. We thought it would be fun and informative to share an inspiring success story regarding the importance of education in the life of one of our community's most outstanding leaders. We know education is right in the middle of the social justice issues and economic prosperity opportunities of our country, because homelessness, poverty, community violence, global competitiveness affect schools and their students and families. Carmen is the retired City of Seattle police chief. She served with the Seattle Police Department for 28 years, beginning as an entry-level patrol officer and later becoming the first African-American woman chief of police, managing approximately 2,000 sworn and civil employees before retiring in 2020. Carmen is the Leadership Council Chair for the United Negro College Fund in Seattle. Thank you, Carmen. She is a contributor to MSNBC, CNBC, and NBC News affiliates, and a law enforcement analyst for King 5 News in Seattle. She is regularly requested as a subject matter expert and keynote speaker, both locally and nationally, on a variety of topics: leadership, reimagining policing, police reform, race, women in policing, and diversity and inclusion. Carmen has a Master's of Science in Criminal Justice from Northeastern University. She has completed the FBI Executive Institute program, the FBI National Academy, the Criminal Justice Executive Leadership Academy, and the Major Cities Chiefs Association for Policing. I want to start by asking you, Carmen, to discuss and give us some background on you. What was an early experience that shaped your view of the world? Well, who are your role models, and who are your mentors who shaped your choices?
Well, first, let me say good afternoon. I am so incredibly honored to be here. I'm with you all virtually. I'm at my house. There's some construction going on, so I decided to spare you that noise and put on my headphones. So that's why they're on. I switched out when I realized this might get a little noisy. And as we, work through virtual world, we have dogs and construction and and all sorts of other interruptions. So I just wanted to minimize that. Thank you for that great introduction, Linda, and also for the very great words of wisdom about really that leadership involves courage and, and self-sacrifice that came from earlier. So that was really inspiring and actually quite true in my view. I'm reflecting back, and I have been lately a lot on my childhood and all the experiences, like we all have, that have made us to be the people we are today. I'm about halfway through a book that I'm writing that's being published by HarperCollins and should be out in June of this year. And in it, I talk a little bit about my childhood and certainly about other things coming up and leadership challenges along the way that we all garner and gain, and the importance of mentoring and sponsorship and allies, and all of that is in there as well. But to your question, there's not one specific thing I think that really shaped me, but I will say, generally speaking, and this is going to sound a bit cliche, but really a lot of things start at home with the way you are raised, with believing in your faith, with having a support structure, whether that's, adopted family or whomever, who really help guide you and give you, the foundation of how you move forward. My parents, both are deceased now, but they really taught us about resilience, working hard, treating other people kindly, believing in our faith and believing in ourselves. And those lessons that your parents and my parents instilled in me have really helped me all along the way whether it's personally or professionally, and not allowing myself to be blocked or dissuaded by others, and also being kind to people, which is really important as well, and having resilience and believing in yourself. Because if you don't, it doesn't matter how much other people believe you can do something. If you don't have that level of faith in yourself, it's not going to happen. So it really starts with you and your inner thoughts and how you believe or perceive yourself. And I think those lessons have really helped me, throughout so many different events in my life. And I'm sure others have their own experiences. And it's those core values that you hold on to and those principles that can guide you when times are tough.
That is just wonderful. And I know that in our conversations, you've talked to me about, your mentorship with others, because sometimes families are not able to provide the guidance that we hope they will. But I know that you have talked to me about the role that you've played as a mentor, and and when you played sports, how important mentors and advocates were there. Speaking of that, how were you able to go to college? How were you able to pay for college? Were those was that a challenge?
Yeah, it was a challenge. And I will say this, I'm the second generation, but before my mom's generation, no one in our family had graduated college. I mean, for a whole host of reasons. And so it was really important. I didn't graduate right away. I took my time getting there, but I finally did it. So I started out at Eastern Washington University. Very many of you will be familiar with that, and Cheney. And then I stayed there. I didn't graduate right away. I went through almost 3 years, and then was in ROTC and wanted to, I think they split the summers up to go to military training. And I went to the military training and I stayed there in the Army, which to my parents' great chagrin, they were absolutely mortified. But it was what I wanted to do, and they allowed me to do that. And I had some great experiences in the military, and I'm so glad that I did stay and made that decision at the time. It was right for me for where I was. And I did a lot of maturing being in the military service. And again, I talk about that in the book, but it was pretty funny, some of the experiences. And then I joined I worked in accounting, I joined the police department, finished my degree. And then while I was deputy chief, I finished my master's degree. It was a tough time, but I thought it was incredibly important to advance in my education. I still don't feel like I'm done. I mean, life is a continuous learning and continuous improvement and continuous growth. And this was one of the areas where I wanted to make sure that I moved on. So it was really important to me. And as I learned more, honestly, about the impact education has on young people and the trajectory of their lives, that's when I became involved with the United Negro College Fund, because a lot of the information and research has shown that if kids don't have the proper level of education early, we're talking like not pre-middle school, like first grade through fourth grade, once they fall behind and they don't catch up, it really does change the trajectory of their lives. So ensuring that kids are able to read at the fourth grade level when they're in the fourth grade is incredibly important. You can almost make a direct correlation to the lack of education as to the number of people that we have incarcerated. Those are data and facts that I didn't make up. They exist out there for people to research and read. So I've always felt it was very important for people to have an education and to help provide access and avenues for young people, particularly those whose families may not have the means to do so, to encourage them to continue their education. And I won't plug the UNCF, that's not why I'm here, but I will say that it has been incredibly rewarding to be a part of that organization, as well as many others that really focus on young people and giving young people opportunities for success. A college education will mean $1 million on average more money in your over a lifetime for a young person, and how incredibly beneficial that is to all of us when we have people who are educated, who can provide for themselves and their family and their family's education, and it becomes very cyclical in nature. And by the same token, when people don't have those opportunities, or when they are raised in environments which promote negative outcomes, that becomes cyclical as well. And I can tell you from my own experience that we have arrested some people where I talk to the officers and they arrested the grandfather, the father, and the son. So there needs to be an intervention in there, for the good, to break those cycles as well. Sorry, that's my long-winded answer.
I love it. It's so important because it's a wonderful time to reflect on how all of these things are interconnected, and how important having the opportunity to break the cycle of poverty, of lack of education, to create, a living wage job, and to build the structure that we want for success. So that's cool. What motivated you to go into law enforcement? And did you have any trepidation about making that career choice?
That's really funny. I didn't know if I would stay. I thought they were hiring. I'd been in the military. I wanted to try it out. It was a new experience for me. And it was really funny because that first day, about 90 to 95% of the people in the academy, the police academy, will say that they wanted to be a police officer since they were yay high. It's often a calling that people feel much earlier in life. I didn't necessarily have that experience. I didn't know how long I would stay, but I'm so glad that I did join. And I really felt a sense of fulfillment, of civic duty, a sense of camaraderie with others, and a sense of really giving back to community as a part of law enforcement. And I recognize fully that we've had our challenges over history, and law enforcement always hasn't been on the right side of history. But I also, from my own personal experience, know that there are so many good things that officers do and can do to help the fabric of society. And we just have to get all on the same page about how we get there. But truly, I felt like it was rewarding from day one. I learned a lot. I met a lot of people. I was able to make a difference in my community and in the community in Seattle. And I thought it was very important.
It's wonderful. And we know that when we're working with kids through our Rotary partnership and the Portfolio Project, they're having to make these choices and these considerations. And your example about what you went through as you made that choice is really outstanding. And it also lets us know that, there's no direct line. We find our way through a variety of pathways. And so really fun to hear what brought you there. How would you describe the state of social justice in Seattle from your perspective?
Wow, that is a loaded, no pun intended question, but we're in the midst of change. And so in doing so, we really need to find a path to get us to the outcomes that we're looking for. I don't think there's anybody that would argue that we want fairness and equity. We want, our society and the fabric of our society to mesh and be beneficial to everyone who lives, who works, or who visits the city of Seattle or the state of Washington. So we know that there are some real challenges there. We have to meet those challenges. I don't think there's any way to really deny that. But I do believe, and I strongly believe, and will continue to advocate for having a plan and a structure to get there that incorporates the values and the needs of our society and everyone who, again, lives and works and visits Seattle, and visits this area. There has to be a plan on how we do things. And so I would love to see all the stakeholders coming together. And we know that there's diverse opinion there, but there's also room for compromise, and there's room for making change. I don't believe, and I'll be on record saying maybe to a lot of people's, distaste, but I don't believe in action that damages property and hurts people. And I think when that occurs, that type of dissent is a step too far. So I do believe that people should come together. They should talk about, they should demonstrate, they should let their opinions and voices be known, but not to the demise of businesses and neighborhoods and that kind of a thing. I feel very strongly about that there's a place for everybody to express themselves and to have, constructive dialogue and even constructive outcomes without hurting others.
Wonderful. That's why we appreciate your leadership and balance. And you know, the Rotary has really stepped into leadership around social
Mhm.
justice and understanding what's happening in our community. And as we think about, you know, where we want to be, education is one of those areas. And to the extent that we have large segments of our community, you know, not being able to fully participate in educational opportunities and to succeed, that's an area where we can collaborate with others. So Carmen, what will you do next, and what impact do you plan on having on social justice and education through your next role?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know what I want to do when I grow up for sure, but I can tell you, I've been working really hard. You know, you cannot spend almost 30 years in a career, at least in my view, and just not be invested. And so I'm really, really invested in the outcomes of policing in America, where we go, public safety. And I'll never sort of walk away from that. I've had a great opportunity to talk on some of the most critical issues through my work with you know, MSNBC and CNBC and NBC, and I've enjoyed that experience and that opportunity. I still stay very active on a number of committees: the Human and Civil Rights Committee for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Executive Institute, and others, where we really are trying to tackle some of these really pervasive issues and social justice issues as they intersect with policing. And there's a lot of intersection there. And so I think that's really important. I think I'll always have a role there, and we'll continue to look for opportunities to have an impact, because it matters to me as a person in this community and this society that we are advancing and moving in ways that help everybody. So, you know, not sure exactly where I'll land for sure, but I know that it will always, there will always be room and space for me to work on these really important issues, and I will continue to do so for as long as I can.
Thank you so much. Well, I want to open it up to questions from Rotarians during our conversation with Carmen.
Great.
All right. Linda Thompson Black, thank you so much. Carmen, are you ready for this?
Yes.
I'm not
Oh,
sure if
sir.
I've ever seen this many questions, and they're all over the place, so I love it. I'm going to start with any thoughts about the current mayoral race?
Wow. You know, I'm not allowed to endorse any candidates, just as it's just part of my contract. But I will say this: I think that, you know, Seattle, and I say this very honestly, is at the precipice, a real point where we can be, where Seattle can be, the top tier world-class city that we know it is, or, you know, we can go in a different direction. And I think that whoever wins, we should be looking at somebody that has experience, that is really invested in the community here and has a history of being invested. I think that's going to be incredibly important. I know there's so many people out there, so many Rotarians. I know this is the Education Committee sponsoring, but a lot of other Rotarians are on this call as well, who want to see and who have been invested in and have families and history here in the city. And I think that is incredibly important. And someone who's going to listen to all sides and not be myopic in their view of what's happening. You know, I believe in race and social justice change and transformation. I think we can all accept that. But it's not the only thing. I think that there are a lot of stakeholders in the city, and there are all sorts of things that need to be addressed. You know, the potholes still need to be filled, transportation still needs to be addressed, the infrastructure needs to be addressed, economic development, businesses, you know, how we deal with our parks and those shared spaces. All of those things are critically important. And if you just become focused on one issue, you'll find that there'll be demise in so many other areas that none of it moves forward. So that's my long-winded way of saying I really hope that we have somebody who has a history of being invested in this community and in listening to others to help advance all areas.
You know who I think would make a really good next mayor?
Who's that?
Really? 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 You'll want to think about that. All right. picking up on what you were just saying, what factors will make the next police chief successful? What are the 3 top fundamental pieces that need to be in place?
Yeah, well, that's a really complicated question. I think Chief Diaz is doing a great job, particularly under the circumstances, while we're moving through as a nation, as a society, locally, through all of these racial and social justice issues, public safety issues, all of the rhetoric from the summer that caused so many officers to leave. So now that we're in this sort of situation where we don't have enough officers to respond to calls to service, and to my knowledge, don't have a plan in place to address some of the city's critical needs, particularly under this pandemic. So it's going to be very tough, but staffing will be an issue. Ensuring that there is a collaborative process with others. I think that making sure that for those who want to see some alternative responses, we should incorporate those responses where we can and where it doesn't jeopardize our people's safety, but enhances it. And there's going to have to be some continued dialogue with all the stakeholders in the city. I think the chief, whoever that is going to need to be able to do that and be open to alternatives. Everything evolves and changes, but it should be done incrementally and systematically, so as not to have a negative effect on our community. I think as you look around, I think everybody can point out some areas where we need some growth and some more engagement.
All right. So to that, how important do you think it is for police officers to have a college degree or a college education?
Yeah, that has been debated a lot. I haven't finished my degree yet, so I didn't finish till after so I think what's really critically important, I think it's great to have education. I think that as a part of that, when you go through the academy, if you don't have that degree, you should get credits for it. We should always incentivize that. But we also are looking for quality of character. I think that a degree certainly shows that you have the ability to stick with the program, to learn more. It exposes people to different thoughts, and different ideas. So I think it's important. But I also really believe strongly that quality of character is so much more critical. How you engage with people, how you respect people, how you understand people. You can learn that in many different ways that always don't involve college. I think we just have to be open to all sorts of people with all sorts of levels of education there. But that would be the most critical thing, because we all know people who are well educated, but they're not nice people. They're not people you'd want to invite to your home, and they're not people you'd want to addressing your children or others. So I don't put all my weight in that basket. I think it's important, but not the most important thing. We really want officers who have life experience, who understand, the fabric of society and certainly the local community, and how to give back and engage, have compassion and care, because most of what they're dealing with is people in various levels of crisis or trauma or other issues. And so I think there's a combination of things. So I think a degree is good. I'm not going to ever knock having education. Education is incredibly important, but I would say it's not the only thing.
All right. So I swear to you, I'm reading these questions in order.
Okay.
Do you want to weigh in on the Siobhan trial?
Weigh in which way? I've been asked. I've been speaking about it on NBC and MSNBC about some of the aspects. I think what I will say that from what I've watched and what I've commented on is that it is incredibly important to lay out all the details as thoroughly and as factually as possible, so that everyone understands specifically what they're dealing with. The video, the audio is highly emotional for a lot of folks, understandably so. But really I think the prosecutor and the defense, by the way, also have been pretty good about trying to present in a way that takes the temperature down and really deals with the facts before them. And so that they can evaluate what happened and how it happened and what the outcome needs to be. I think one of the aspects, I'll be honest, they talk about the training, and training is incredibly important. But I think all of us recognize that we have discretion as officers and how we use that training. And the force used really needs to match the resistance that you're presented with. I myself in Seattle on at least 2 occasions have been with groups of officers of 4 or more who had to detain people who were in various states of crisis or other issues. And I will say you modulate what you're doing to what you're seeing, and what's being done. So a person who is not combative, who is not fighting you, there's no reason for you to continue, in an aggressive nature. So that's just how I view things. I will let the trial, all the information come out and all the evidence and counter evidence speak for itself. But certainly just in terms of basic, a basic reasonable standard for use of force, the amount of force used must be reasonable and necessary to affect a lawful purpose. And that's straight from the law books.
Yeah, good. All right. So any comments about defunding the police?
I think I've been on record multiple times saying I don't necessarily agree with defunding if it means, first we need to find a mutual definition. Some have said it means abolish. I certainly don't agree with that. I do believe that there may be opportunity to shift responsibilities in other areas. And I think that discussion is occurring and continues to occur, but that can't be done, in a one fell swoop. Everything needs to be modulated and tested and reviewed to see what works and what doesn't work. I really support the idea of piloting certain programs in areas to see, hey, did this work? Were we able to provide service? Did we have good outcomes? Why wouldn't we do that? But to all out just take money out of the police department without a real good public safety plan, I don't really see the benefit to anybody that's involved. I don't know if anybody is going to feel better if there's nobody that can respond to assaults, robbery, property damage, destruction, domestic violence, weapons and shots fired, traffic accidents, dangerous collisions, suicidal people, all the calls that officers deal with on a day in and day out basis. I think there needs to be really a good structure in place if they want to start removing funds and moving it into other areas.
All right, so you started going down this track with Linda. Somebody's curious what leaders and mentors were important to you in your professional development, particularly in your adolescence and young adult life.
Yeah, well, when I was young, obviously my parents were really important to me, and school teachers. I learned a lot at school. You spend, hours a day in your classroom with your teachers and your peers. So I thought that I had some teachers who really stood out as really investing in me and talking to me and helping me through. So that was very important to me growing up. I was I played sports, so obviously my coaches and what they thought and how they treated me was incredibly important. That's why I'm a big advocate for kids getting involved in extracurricular activities, whether it's sports or dance or art or instrument music, whatever it is. Very important for kids to have those outside interests and to be able to develop them and have, you develop friendships and mentors along the way just from your exposure to other things. So that was incredibly important coming up. And then, when I came into policing, I particularly talk about that. And I talk about this in my book too, which Kathleen O'Toole was a great sponsor, someone who really had amazing credibility internationally. I really saw something in me, made me her number 2, and really opened doors for me in many, many ways. All across the country because of her. She was held in such high regard. Gil Kurlikowski, who I still talk to on a routine basis, who left Seattle, became the drug czar, and then the head of the largest law enforcement agency with the Customs and Border Patrol. I think he's now teaching at NYU and doing consulting, but also a great ally and sponsor and mentor. My first sergeant, Pat Hayes on the department, a great ally and sponsor and mentor. So many people, men and women, Black and white, in the job, not on the job, have been helpful to me in many ways. But those in particular stood out as people who invested time and energy in me and really gave me a level of exposure to understand and learn. When I first became deputy chief, I had no desire to be the chief. I was kind of pinching myself that I was deputy chief, but by the time Kathleen was leaving and had turned over a lot of the responsibility to me, I felt very confident in my ability to run and lead the organization. So those are some of the critical people who were very helpful to me.
Yeah, awesome. I'm glad you stayed with the parents. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I'm noticing a theme with these questions. There are no easy questions today. So don't you miss us? You'll have to come back as a member. As a former chief of police, you had a front row seat to the challenges of homelessness within Seattle. Now that you're the former chief of police, what are your observations and recommendations for resolving this growing issue that is impacting our beautiful city?
Geez, I wish I had the answer to that. I can tell you honestly that I would stay up nights, pondering what to do, particularly when I was in an apartment on 8th and 8th and Madison. I'd have to come down the hill. Sometimes I'd walk in and I'd come down the hill on Cherry Street between 6th and 5th and see people, wrapped up and, tight, sleeping on a sidewalk that's on a hill. And I, just move, around them to get down the hill. And I would think to myself, how much trauma would be in your life to have you sleeping underneath a freeway with the lights on, wrapped up on a hill, that you are so probably too afraid to go to some of these encampments, but still in a situation. So, there's so many aspects to that. The people themselves, and I know that there are varied stories and very varied reasons, what to do as a city and what the structure should be. I don't have the full answer, but I know just leaving it alone, I don't believe is the right thing to do. I believe that people are there for various reasons, and it has to be a multi-pronged approach and a multi-agency approach. Because I have met couples who literally just were down on their luck, and talked to them, who needed job and employment. The husband was living, at the YMCA, and the wife was living at Mary's place, and they just really needed a lift up and a place to stay. I've also talked to people who, were very, addicted to drugs and really needed help to get themselves out of that situation, and to move on. And I also know that the impact to neighborhoods when these large groups are there, and so it doesn't just go. There is an effect. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say here. So people want to be able to utilize the parks, and it should be a place where everybody can go. And if there is not space for them, then that's a problem too. So I think that, there really needs to be a multi-pronged approach to address all the various issues, so that everyone who has a stake in this, and which is just everyone, can move forward better. I don't have the one answer. I don't think it's going to be letting people remain in those conditions. I do believe there needs to be some level of housing provided, and to move people out of those conditions, some level of rehabilitative sources available for people who seek rehabilitation, some level of mental health. That problem, that issue in our city is really prevalent. What are we going to do with people that officers come across, that, or anybody comes across, that the mental health issues don't allow them the ability to really take care of themselves? And so all of that intersection of all of that, plus the criminals. There are folks that go out there, people don't want to necessarily believe it, but I've seen it, and they exploit these folks who are vulnerable in many different ways, and they sell them drugs, and they engage sometimes in exploiting young women, and all those problems are interchanged in there as well. And plus, people who often are struggling to support their addictive habits end up, because they're not working, taking things from others and selling them, and so the neighborhood, has crime. All of those things are true. And so it's not just a one size fits all. And I think most of us know that, but, I don't know why people aren't investing in every single aspect. It seems like some people believe just leave it, and that's all they can see. And some people believe get them housing, and that's all they can see. And some people believe in if we just had rehabilitative services. But it's got to be a combination of all of those things in order to really have the effect, I believe, to move this along and get better. I mean, almost $1 billion donated, and we still have some of the same issues. Go ahead.
One word answer. Is there a city in this country that does it well? Handling, working with the homeless.
Well, they do it better.
Okay, better.
Yeah. I think there are examples of cities that are doing a little better. Denver, I think, is one of them. That they can model some things after that. So,
That's one word. That's good. That's a short word. Denver.
Sorry.
No, that's awesome. Can you comment on supporting community initiatives to provide mental health responder services with police minimally involved, such as the Cahoots program in Eugene, Oregon?
I am vaguely, just tangentially familiar with Cahoots, and I know that has been promoted by some council and others. I mean, I think conceptually, the idea of having a co-response or even a different response to people with mental health is not a bad idea conceptually. I mean, Eugene's a lot smaller than Seattle, and I don't know that they get the 18,000 calls for mental health crisis that Seattle does. But I think there's a place for it, but I do think it needs to be some sort of joint response. What that looks like, obviously, that's for Chief Diaz and others to determine. But we've seen people in crisis and what they have the potential to do. It's their behavior is questionable on a good day. And so we recently had a person murdered by a person in crisis, a service worker. So we have to, acknowledge that there's danger involved in that. So while we can look to mental health providers to give us extra information, maybe to do an on-site evaluation, and be real contributors to helping to minimize the number of people who are hurt in these encounters. I have two daughters, 28 and 26. I would not send them out on their own. They're well educated to deal with some of these people in crisis, again, because their behavior is unpredictable and it can be dangerous.
Yeah, got it. Can you give an example of words of advice that your parents gave you when you had negative comments from teachers and classmates, etc.?
I was the kid with the apple. I didn't have negative comments from teachers.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely did. My parents didn't allow us to have negative comments from teachers, at least not me anyway.
You sat in the front row, right?
Yes. My brother tested them, but I wasn't that kid, right? So, but my parents were, they were positive. They really showed us a lot of love. They certainly weren't perfect, but I think I grew up in a home with a lot of love and a lot of care, and that really goes a long way for how you're able to, face the world and address issues as they come up. But I know not everybody had that benefit. Some, had other things and other situations. But, they really taught me to, be resilient. And I think that I've had to rely on those lessons, those core values a few different times throughout my life. So yeah, they wanted us to follow the rules. They wanted us to be confident and really instill that in us.
That's good. Law enforcement presence is one piece of community safety. As we seek effective reopening of downtown Seattle, what else should we as Rotarians help to provide or develop?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of discussion about that, and I will openly say I'm not the expert. I think there's a critical component for police, for service providers, healthcare workers, and others to engage in some of those problems downtown. Businesses, working with them. It's incredibly important that the economic development is moved forward in the downtown core. And I think that's going to take a lot of stakeholders at the table and really working on some of those, crisis issues. I know that there was I got a lot of flack when I was chief. I'm not the chief anymore, but I got a lot of flack for issues on 3rd Avenue, either on the Yesler end or at 3rd and Pike and Pine. And I will tell you, we deployed a lot of resources down there to Yesler on a daily basis. But the number of assaults, I think it was like 292 assaults in I guess less than a year. I mean, there was a lot of assaults going on, a lot of problems. And I think that there just needs to be a joint effort in how we address people who are in crisis. I talked to attorneys who have been, people have swung at them and did different things, not out of malice per se, but a lot of times we don't know what's going on in their head. And so we need to figure out, I think, a better process for how we're going to help those folks, because people are not going to come downtown if they don't feel safe. This is not going to happen. And so I think that's a real critical component to the public safety. And it can't just be the cops, and particularly right now when there aren't even enough cops to respond to all the calls for service. It's going to have to be very much a joint effort from a lot of multi-agency organizations.
So I've got room maybe for at least one more question. Let's see. Since you have retired, it seems like power and significance of your voice has only grown. Would you agree?
I think the reach is further. I actually do, surprisingly, because that really wasn't something, but I do think that I'm able to talk to larger audiences after going through what could only be described as a highly, publicized, events here in Seattle, that sort of catapulted me into that realm. But Seattle I love this area, I love this state, and so it's very important to me talk about these issues and to try to have some sort of national impact on some of the local issues as well.
All right, we've got 45 seconds left, so I'm going to squeeze this one in. How can SPD and SPOG work together for mutual benefit of our city?
Yeah, there's always going to be tension between the management and the guild. But we expect that to be a healthy tension. I think that the members are really going to have to do some soul searching about who their leadership is and and the direction that they want that union to go. I think there can be a real benefit to working with the members of SPOG. I think it's important that the leadership reflect the general mindset of all the membership. I don't know if that's necessarily happening right now.
All right. Carmen, as I suggested before, subliminally, you should be the next man. 2, you should come back as did you get that now? Come back
I got it.
We miss you. You're awesome. Linda, thank you for beginning this conversation today, and thank you for to the Education Committee for bringing this to our attention. Carmen, I can't imagine a better spokesperson, so thank you for being here today. We miss you.
Right. Thank you for inviting me.
Get ready for your write-in candidacy campaign for mayor, because it's erupting on our chat window right now.
Yeah, that's coming from the guy who can't even vote here, so whatever. Carmen, if you have a moment to, there's lots of questions, and forgive me for not getting to them all, but it was a good conversation. But if you have any time to go through the questions, that would be fantastic. If not, then there they are.
Right, I'm sure I can make arrangements. Thank you very much for having me. I think Seattle Rotary, you've been a real icon in this community, and what you give is very important. So thank you all.